There's something almost no one notices about Genesis 111. You've probably read it before, maybe more than once, but the structure itself, the way these chapters are arranged, it's telling a story beneath the surface. It's the story of one choice that fractures everything, and it echoes forward through every chapter that follows it. Most people read these verses as separate stories: creation, the garden, the fall, Cain and Abel, the flood. But they're not separate. They're a careful sequence designed to show you something about human nature and divine character, about what happens when freedom is given and then abused. Let me show you what's actually written and what it reveals about the entire biblical narrative. Genesis opens not with, "In the beginning, God created light." It opens with something far stranger. The text says darkness was first, water was first, disorder was first. Then God, moving across that chaos, began to separate, to distinguish, to create order from formlessness. This isn't accidental phrasing. The ancient Hebrew word is tohu vavohu, which means emptiness and void. God didn't create from nothing in the way we usually think. God took what was disordered and brought shape and meaning to it. And then comes the detail most people skip. God made humans in his image, but not for decoration. Genesis 1:28 makes this clear. Humans were given dominion. The word means rule, steward, care for creation. They weren't made to worship in temples. They were made to be representatives, image bearers, bringing God's order and goodness into the world. This is the foundation. This is what humans were designed to do. But then Genesis 2 slows down. The pace shifts entirely. We move from the cosmic to the intimate. God creates this garden, this specific space, and places the human there with one boundary, not 100 rules, not a complicated legal code, one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And here's where the text becomes almost provocative. God says, if you eat from it, you will surely die. That's the warning. But then the snake arrives, and the snake tells a different story. The snake doesn't deny God's warning. Instead, it reframes it. It says the real danger isn't death. It's that God is withholding something, that eating from the tree will make you like God, knowing good and evil. The snake isn't lying. It's truth-telling in a way designed to create doubt. You see the subversion? The actual consequence is real. But the reason for the boundary is questioned. Was God protecting them, or was God limiting them? This is where it gets personal. The woman and then the man face an archetypal human choice. Will they trust God's definition of reality and goodness, or will they seize the right to define it themselves? They choose the second path. They eat, and the text doesn't describe some cosmic explosion, describes something quieter and more devastating. They notice they're naked, they hide, they cover themselves. Shame enters the world, but shame isn't the consequence of being seen. Shame is the consequence of self-consciousness, of realizing they're separated from their own purpose. Immediately after, God comes walking in the garden, and there's a conversation. God asks questions. Where are you? Did you eat? And in the responses, you see the fracturing beginning to happen in real time. The man blames the woman blames the snake. No one takes responsibility. Relationships are already breaking. And then God pronounces consequences, not as punishment, but as reality. The woman will experience pain in childbirth and difficulty in relationships. The man will experience toil, sweat, the resistance of the ground itself. Creation no longer cooperates with human flourishing. It resists. The ground is cursed. Now here's what most people miss. The first consequence isn't about punishment. It's about broken relationship. The second casualty, and this matters deeply, is the man's relationship with his own purpose. He was made to tend the garden, to bring order to creation. Now creation fights him. He works not toward flourishing, but toward mere survival. And the third fracture is between humanity and God. There's a barrier, shame, distance. The intimacy is gone. God doesn't leave, but the walk in the garden stops. Yet before chapter 3 ends, God makes a promise. It's brief, almost hidden in the middle of curse language. God says to the serpent, "I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. One of her descendants will strike your head. You will strike his heel. Scholars have debated this verse for centuries. Some call it the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. What's clear is this: despite rebellion, despite fracture, God doesn't abandon the plan. A rescue is promised, not explained, not detailed, but promised. The story moves forward with that tension held, judgment and grace together. Chapters 4 through 11 become almost repetitive in their tragedy. Each story follows a similar pattern. God gives humans another chance. Humans choose rebellion at a larger scale. God responds with judgment, but grace remains. Cain murders Abel out of jealousy. God marks him but doesn't kill him. Lamech commits worse violence and boasts about it. The world fills with violence. God sees it, and then Noah, called righteous by the text, builds the ark. The flood comes. Everything resets, but the moment the waters recede, the same cycle begins again. Ham's shame becomes another fracture. The line continues, but its fracture. Then comes Babel. This story is crucial because it shows the full consequences of human autonomy without reference to God. Humanity says, let's build a tower to make ourselves a name. Let's not be scattered. Let's consolidate power through architecture and unified language. God scatters them anyway. Languages fragment. The ability to build unified civilizations shatters. Notice what God doesn't do. God doesn't destroy humanity again. God judges, but through confusion, through making coordination impossible. It's mercy wrapped in fragmentation. The pattern is now complete. Creation, rebellion, fracture, rescue, repeated at larger scales through 11 chapters. This is where the hinge appears. At the moment when humanity is fully scattered, fully fragmented, unable to coordinate even language, God calls one man, Abraham. The text says, "Go from your country and your people and your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation." This is the shift. The story has been cosmic until now. God and all humanity. Now it narrows. God will work through one family to reach the scattered nations. This becomes the entire structure of what follows. Chapters 111 are about God and the world. Chapters 1250 are about God and Abraham. Descendants. The hinge is clean. But notice what's happened by chapter 12. Humanity has proven that freedom without reference to God leads to greater and greater fracture. So God's rescue plan changes shape. Instead of working with all humanity at once, God will work through a covenant with one man, building a nation, building a people, building a witness. Through that nation, eventually all nations will be blessed. But that requires the narrowing. The deeper structure here reveals something about divine character that goes beyond doctrine. God doesn't revoke freedom. Even after the rebellion, even after Cain's murder, even after the violence of Lamech, even after Babel, freedom remains. Humans keep choosing, and God keeps responding, not with coercion, but with consequence and grace held together. The promise in Genesis 3 that a seed will come runs like a thread through all of Genesis 111. It's not explicit, it's not declared loudly, but it's there. The text holds two realities. Human fracture is real, and God's commitment to rescue is real. Both are true, both matter. One detail deserves pause here. In Genesis 6, just before the flood, there's a strange passage about the Nephilim. The text says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The text is cryptic about what this means. Ancient Near Eastern context suggests these might have been understood as hybrid beings, the offspring of divine and human unions. Scholars disagree on interpretation. Some read it as mythological imagery, shared with other ancient cultures. Others read it as historical claim. What matters here is what the text emphasizes. It's presented as part of the corruption that precedes the flood. It's part of the cascading chaos that leads God to send judgment. The boundaries between divine and human realm are being violated. The order God established is being transgressed at every level, not just morally, but cosmically. The linguistic details matter too. When God addresses the situation before the flood, the text says, "My spirit will not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The word here for spirit is ruach, the same word used for the ruach Elohim. the Spirit of God moving over the waters at creation. God's presence, God's animating breath, is being withdrawn. Humanity will live shorter lives. The lifespan numbers in Genesis 111 are extraordinary, hundreds of years. But they decline. Adam lives 930 years, Noah lives 950. But after the flood, the numbers drop sharply. By Abraham, lifespans are 175 years. By Moses, they're down to 120. The text is showing decline, deterioration, the slow withdrawal of divine vitality from a creation that has turned from its purpose. This isn't poetic embellishment. It's part of a larger narrative about what happens to creation when humans abandon their role as image bearers. The food imagery throughout these chapters also forms a pattern. In Genesis 2, humans are told they can eat freely from every tree except one. Abundance is the setting, but after the fall, bread comes only through sweat. In Genesis 3:19, God says, "By the sweat of your face you will eat bread." The basic necessity of human survival becomes difficult. Work itself becomes toil. By the time we reach Noah, the only food mentioned is what Noah grows. He plants a vineyard, but then he becomes drunk from it, exposing his shame. Food, which should sustain and connect, becomes a source of further fracture. These patterns, the repeated themes of shame, fracture, consequence, promised rescue, aren't random. They're woven deliberately through the narrative. The geography matters too, though its subtle Eden is described with rivers flowing from it, watering the land. It's a place of flourishing, but when humans are expelled, they're sent east away from the presence of God, represented in the garden. Movement east throughout the Old Testament often signals separation from the blessing center. Cain is marked and sent east of Eden. The Tower of Babel happens in the plains of Shinar, far from the centers of God's revelation. When Abraham is called, he's called to go to a land that will be shown to him, a new center, a new possibility. Geography maps onto theology. The further humans move from the center of God's revelation, the more fragmented and chaotic their stories become. The repetition of genealogies, these long lists of names, serves a purpose most readers miss. Names represent continuity. These genealogies prove the line survives despite judgment. Adam to Seth to Enosh through Noah. The chain holds even through flood and judgment. The human project continues. But notice what happens to moral character as the genealogies progress. Adam's line produces Cain, the murderer. Cain's line produces Lamech, the boaster of violence. The text doesn't hide moral decline. It records it plainly. Only Noah is called righteous. The genealogies are not triumphal records. They're honest counting of human failure, perpetuated across generations. The covenant language, though not explicitly called covenant until later, begins to appear in Genesis 6 when God addresses Noah. The text says, "But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark. You, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you." This is the first use of the word berith, covenant. It appears in the midst of judgment. God is both judging the world and establishing relationship with Noah. The covenant is grace. It's God saying, "I will continue my project. I will work through you. I won't abandon creation to its own chaos." This becomes the pattern that repeats with Abraham, with Moses, with David. Covenant is God's way of narrowing focus, deepening commitment, and ensuring that grace has a particular people through whom it flows. The text treatment of human speech changes across these chapters too. In Genesis 12, humans don't speak much, God speaks. Creation obeys. But after the fall, human speech becomes central. The serpent speaks. The humans justify themselves. Cain disputes with God about his offering. Lamech speaks boastfully about his violence. By Babel, human speech is the very thing God disrupts. The ability to speak together, to coordinate through language, was fragmented. Speech itself, one of the capacities that marks image bearers, becomes a source of confusion and separation. Language was supposed to create fellowship. Instead, it becomes a boundary. This linguistic fracture prefigures the need for redemption at Pentecost, where the Spirit will eventually restore what Babel divided. But that's far ahead in the narrative. The ark itself deserves attention. It's described with exact dimensions, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. It has 3 decks. The specificity matters. This isn't just mythic imagery. It's presented as a real vessel with real proportions. Inside it, Noah preserves the diversity of creation, male and female, of every living thing. The ark becomes a microcosm of creation, preserved through judgment. It's a redemptive image that in the midst of death and destruction, God provides a way through. The waters that destroyed are the same waters that carried the ark to safety. Judgment and salvation are bound together. You can have one without the other when dealing with a God who is both just and loving. The promise of seasons that comes after the flood. Genesis 822. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease, is a promise of stability and order after chaos. It's God saying, I will not again destroy all life. I will maintain creation's rhythms. Humanity has proven it cannot be trusted with absolute freedom, but creation itself will be sustained. The seasons return, the covenant holds, there is mercy here. God could have abandoned the project. Instead, God commits to working within it, through limitations, through grace offered to specific people, through a narrowing that will eventually lead to salvation for all. Pay attention to this detail. Adam names his son Seth after Abel's death. The name means God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Human naming, the power of words, is exercised here in hope. Despite the murder of Abel, despite Cain's exile, the line continues. Humans, fractured as they are, still possess the dignity of naming, of contributing to the story, of hope. They're not passive observers. They're agents, even broken agents. And that capacity to hope, to continue, to try again, that's part of the image of God too. It's not just about reason or will, it's about perseverance. The 3 takeaways that emerge from Genesis 111 are these. Humans were made to steward creation as God's representative. Freedom without reference to God fragments every relationship. God's rescue plan persists despite repeated human rebellion. These aren't moral lessons. They're observations about how the universe works, how human nature works, how God works. The first 11 chapters of Genesis establish the terms on which everything else in Scripture operates. You cannot understand Abraham, Moses, David, or Jesus without understanding that they enter a narrative already shaped by these realities: creation, purpose, rebellion, fracture, and the promise of rescue. When you read Genesis 111 again, and I'd encourage you to read it slowly, paying attention to what's written, not what you've been told it means. Notice the structure. Notice how judgment and grace intertwine. Notice how human agency and divine purpose coexist. Notice the promises hidden in the narrative. And notice how by chapter 12, the story has set the stage for a nation, a people, a witness, through whom God will begin to address what was broken in chapter 3. If this interpretation has shifted how you're thinking about these early chapters, I'd encourage you to explore the genealogies and promises deeper. The Prosper 2. There's a study guide linked in the description that maps out the covenants, traces the line through Genesis, and shows you how each story connects to what comes next. Read them with someone. Read them in community. These chapters were meant to be read together, discussed, wrestled with. That's how you find what's actually written beneath the surface.